the cell function working. That's where real detox is. If there's any message that we get you to understand, it's that. That's the key to weight loss, right? Is we don't want to take more hormones. We want to get our cells hearing the hormones. Therefore, you have to reduce that inflammation.
So in 2 or 3 generations, we've gone from almost non-existent chronic disease in children to half of our children with a chronic disease by the time they're 12. This is not subtle. This is a tragedy at the human level that we are ignoring.
I started obsessing on the human detoxification system. Everybody's got some level of something in there. So my job is to show you, how do we get rid of them? Well, this is what detox is built out of. These are the supplements that help it. A high-fat diet is a great complement to detoxification.
So wait, who's our first guest?
So our first guest is Dan Pompa. He trains physicians all over the country on ketogenics and fasting.
You know, it's funny, I didn't get a chance to see that tape that you put in.
Go, you guys.
Oh, wow, sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, guys. Oh, we're supposed to be shooting right now. Hold on a second. Wait a minute. Okay, ready? We gotta get this started.
All right, let's mark it.
Okay, thank you.
Here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2. Take it away, Montel.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us on The Real Skinny on Fat, the truth about weight loss. I'm Montel Williams.
And I'm Naomi Whittle.
And we are so happy to be so deep into our journey into the fascinating world of health and nutrition. And I'm so proud to have you as really my co-host for this entire thing. Thank you so much for being here and bringing all this information. This woman is probably one of the best. She's known as the wellness warrior. Thanks for being here. Let's get started.
Excellent.
Come on.
So
look, how about our first guest? Our first guest is really interesting, so tell us a little bit about him.
Right. Dan Pompa is an incredible individual. Not only does he train physicians all over the country on the importance of ketogenic diets and fasting, but he really lives and walks the walk.
Now, we've been talking about fasting on a couple of our previous episodes, and still, you know, it's a generational thing, I gotta tell you, because you talk to people of a certain age group, they go, I don't know about that. He's going to bring a different little perspective to this, correct?
I think so. And the number of people that he is impacting through his strategies around how to fast and the best ways to do it and the 5-day water fast, it's going to be really exciting.
Oh, come on. I got to see this. Come on. Take a look at this.
I'm so excited that you're here today. Can you tell me a little bit about who you are, what you do, what is your passion?
Yeah, well, I'm Dr. Dan Pompa, and my passion is fixing the cell to get people well, you know, and that all came out of my own story, and that's what I teach.
So how does it relate to your own story?
Yeah, you know, the mantra, fix the cell to get well, became very relevant because of my own story, and it is a pain to purpose story. So I said, this is what I teach now, but literally all of it did come out of my story, which, it was back in, I guess, 1999 that I was actually training. I'd have to say I was in the best shape of my life, literally. I was doing cycling races at that time, and cardiovascularly, no doubt, I was in the best shape, but the bottom fell out. It started with fatigue. So most athletes would think I'm overtraining, and that's what I thought. So I took time off, went back on, it was actually worse, took more time off. Then headaches started. Then it went to insomnia. Then I became allergic to like everything I was eating, bloating, I mean, all types of bizarre symptoms. Then it went to irritability, unexplainable anger. My thyroid started, you know, malfunctioning. My hair was coming out. I mean, things that you hear today, massive brain fog. My adrenals were so poor that I couldn't adapt to any stress, not even sound. I mean, I literally remember being in a movie theater with my kids and having to leave because it was just too exciting. I mean, I couldn't handle the stress. I remember watching a football game and our friends were over, and I couldn't handle, I don't even care about football that much, and I couldn't handle the excitement. I had to leave the room. But put it this way, I'll make a long story short. I definitely became somebody who I didn't even recognize. It got to the point where I literally didn't want to live anymore, because living life like that was not worth it. I mean, my world came crashing down, and at that time I had 2 young babies, and I had a thriving practice, and I couldn't even keep it together at home, let alone work. So life as I know it came to a screeching halt.
So, Dr. Pompa, you had a thriving practice and you were helping so many other people, and yet you couldn't keep it together. What were your theories? What did you think was going on?
Like many people probably watching this, I became skinny fat, actually, is a term that I kind of coined as well, meaning that I was losing muscle, but I was gaining belly fat. And of course, you start eating better. When you're not feeling well, you're doing things more and getting worse. Like many, I thought my adrenals. I would address my adrenals. Maybe my energy would get better, but then my sleep would get worse. My anxiety would get worse. I started addressing my thyroid. And certain things would get better, but many things would get worse. I realized at one point I was too far downstream to really matter. So then I said, okay, something's going wrong with my pituitary hypothalamus, and that's the glands that sit right in the center of your brain that control your thyroid, control your adrenals, control really your whole hormonal endocrine system, right? So I knew something was wrong, but when I tried to address that various ways, I would get worse too. But I still thought something's wrong there. I just couldn't figure it out. I became good friends with a very bright endocrinologist, and he said to me, Dan, I think you have mercury poisoning, your body temperatures, and he named a bunch of symptoms. I said, you know what, I thought so too. Literally a year before, I was researching, and I came across something called Mad Hatter's disease. I'm sure you've heard of it. I don't know if our viewers...
Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, it's the people that were making felt hats. They were actually using mercury as part of the process, and they became acutely mercury poisoned, and they became known as a Mad Hatter, right? So I got a blood test, and it showed negative. So, I mean...
No mercury poisoning.
Yeah,
and why would you think, so you had these symptoms, but had you been exposed to a lot of mercury? Well,
I mean, that's the point, is I didn't think I was.
Right.
Right? Okay, so fast forward to this endocrinologist saying, you had mercury poisoning. And I said, well, I did a blood test. He said, wrong test.
Yeah.
He says, it's in the tissue. I don't think you have acute mercury poisoning. So he said, do this test where you take a binder, a chelator, and grab it out of the tissue, then measure the urine. I did it, and then it showed up. Some lead, some other things. So my next question, what you just asked, right? I said, well, how do you think I got this? And he said, well, did you have any dental work done around the time this all happened? And I said, well, I might have, because I had a gold crown put in. It was maybe around there. So I contacted the dentist, who just happened to be one of my good friends, and I got the date. And of course, being a cyclist, I was actually keeping the date, so I knew when my symptoms started. As it turned out, it was just days after that dental appointment where they drilled 2 silver fillings out, which contain 50% mercury, and they put gold in, and I still had fillings in. So now you have something called galvanism, which is opposing metals. Well, that's what a battery is. A battery is 2 opposing metals and an acid. So, which those fillings in your mouth, they leach the life of the fillings. No matter what, it's 50% mercury, they leach the life of the filling. But when you add another metal, now it's coming out tenfold.
So it's going into your body, into your tissue, and it's creating this toxicity.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, what studies actually show, that FASIB is one of the most impressive scientific journals. They showed they presented a study that looked at the number of fillings you have is proportional to how much mercury they find in your brain.
Wow.
And there's even, moms, listen up, this is important, the DRASH study showed the number of fillings, moms, in your mouth is proportional on autopsies, how much they find in the baby's brain. So we start accumulating this mercury in utero. It's literally from the womb to the tomb. I mean, then vaccinations, right? Flu shots, they still have mercury. That's ethyl mercury.
Yeah.
And the thing about ethyl mercury that's interesting, I think, is because drug companies would say at one point that, well, it's ethyl mercury, it's safe. It's out of your body in a day or two. It's so fast out of your body. And then someone else actually did autopsies of the monkeys in the study that they were using. and found it in the brain, all of it. Oh, not just in the brain, but in the hypothalamus pituitary.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, by the way, same with the silver fillings, not just in the brain, but so much of it in the hypothalamus pituitary. That's why I'm trying to fix my thyroid, my adrenals, and wondering what's going on with my hormone system. You know, can't regulate it. I mean, how many people is that today, right? Oh, yeah, and by the way, I wore contact lenses in the end of the 70s, 80s, early 90s. Early 90s is when they took mercury out finally.
Out of the contact lenses.
Saline
I had no
solution.
idea.
We were putting it right into our eyes, optic nerve, right into our brain, hypothalamus pituitary. Yeah, my father loved mercurochrome. Remember that?
Yes.
So methylate mercurochrome had mercury in it. I mean, so the point is this: there's so many exposures. We're not even talking about environmental exposures from living downwind from factories, which I didn't have that problem, but many do.
Right.
Yeah. So many exposures.
You got this urine test. You were able to see sort of where the levels were. What's next?
I had to figure out a solution. Yeah, right. Great question, because then my next question even to him, the endocrinologist, was, well, what do I do? He's like, well, you have to get them out, but be careful. Make sure you get it out right. The rest of the fillings, right? So, I mean, that was kind of the only advice that he gave me. So, of course, hours into learning how to get the rest out safely. And more importantly, hours, months, years into learning how to get it out of my brain. You know, I think today people understand they don't feel well, despite changing their diet, exercising, doing a lot of amazing things, because education is better today on these topics. Probably most of your viewers, you know, have done a lot of these amazing things. But people don't feel well still because there's still an upstream stressor, like mercury, that's deep into their brain. You know, so the point is that we have to go upstream. I had to get it out of my brain. So ultimately, that's how you fix the hormones. Ultimately, that's how you know, that's where real detox is. So something I've coined is, you know, you have to fix the cell to get well. We started there. But more specifically, you have to detox the cell to get well, because that's the epidemic, right? I mean, so it's deep into the cells, you know, and it's deep into those tissues. And if we don't get it out of there, you can take all the supplements, you can do all the diet things, and you're going to still say, why do I still not feel well? Why are my hormones still dysregulated? Why am I still not able to lose weight?
Right. So let's talk about that, right? Detox. Most people have tried some sort of a detox. Tell us about the detoxes that are used all the time.
Yeah.
And what the results are, and how a cellular detox is really doing something that's completely different. You talked about upstream and
you look at it, the colon cleanses, right? Like I said, I think detox is in vogue right now. You know, you go into health food stores and grocery stores, healthy grocery stores, and it's all over the place right now. Because here's why: it's that time of year people want to lose weight, and it's this detox, it's that detox, and
so
the 10-day cleanse, the colon cleanse, the liver cleanse, the 10-day cleanse. Look, there's nothing wrong with any of it, right? I mean, I think we've all done colon cleanses, and people that have trouble going, you know, it helps, right? I mean, it definitely makes you feel better, but all of it is too far downstream. Here's a great example of downstream, and it's an actual example. So if you put a factory that's dumping waste into a river or a stream, right? So you're down here trying to clean up the stream. Maybe you're trying to make the microbiome better so your fish survive, right? Or you're trying to make it more inhabitable to swim in, and, you know, just trying to fix the water. But every time you seem like you fix it, you test it, okay, it's better. Then time goes on and you retest and it's bad again, because you didn't know 10 miles upstream there was a factory dumping mercury in. So downstream means you're not to where the source is, right? So we got to remove the factory upstream.
those colon cleanses, liver cleanses, those are all downstream, like you said,
Right.
working with the microbiome.
Right.
So we go upstream, which is what you did. And how do you detox upstream?
Yeah. I got this thing that just popped into my brain. And I grabbed my notebook and I started jotting down the functions that are going wrong in the cell. This is the problem. And I just wrote it out, and it was 5. And then right after that, I realized 3 of the 5 were R's. And then I realized that the other 2 could have been R's if I just wrote it this way. Well,
Okay, so what are
so
they?
it came
Tell
out
us.
of that,
We
right?
wanna know.
So birthed was my 5 R's
Yeah.
of cellular healing
Okay.
and cellular detox. So that became a roadmap that I started teaching doctors with because they needed that. They need, like, look, the epidemic of toxins that we're all exposed to today, right? This is what's happening at the cell. This is the epidemic that's why we don't feel well, why people are gaining weight, why people can't balance their hormones. So 5 R's. Number 1 is you have to remove the sources. My point, I wouldn't have gotten well if I didn't get rid of the source, right?
Got it.
People have, unknowingly, mold builds up behind walls.
Yeah.
Because of the way we build homes, drywall has paper. It just happens to be the perfect food for mold. Mold's all around us.
Right.
But it's when it, gets into a moist area, all you have to do is to that drywall is add water and mold starts.
So what do we do if we are afraid that we're in a moldy home? Like, are there tests that we can do?
Yeah, there are. There's a test called an ERMI test that we like to do to it's a little more accurate as far as testing your home.
What is it called?
ERMI.
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 Okay.
And it's just a more accurate way of assessing. Mold's very hard to detect. So most people watching this would say, well, I don't see any mold. You don't
Right.
see the mold.
Yes.
It's typically behind the walls. So mold's a big deal,
Yes.
right? If we don't get rid of those things. Heavy metals are a big deal. Where are you getting exposed from,
Yeah.
right? I talked about factors. I talked about, different sources, contacts in the past, flu shots.
And that's right, like flu shots. I mean, for me personally, I got heavy metal toxicity from Chinese herbs.
Right.
Little Chinese herbs.
Loaded
that-
with lead. Despite doing everything right, raising our kids in this
Yep.
healthy way, they start getting constipation, diarrhea, irritability, ADD. I mean, all these things tested their lead off the chart.
Yeah.
Where did they get it? Mom. It's the #1 source. So the point is this, is it's unavoidable. I mean, we are all, from the womb to the tomb, this is a generational problem. I've been blessed to interview some scientists showing that not only are the toxins being inherited in utero from mom and dad, but the genes are getting turned on.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, studies show it's 4 generations minimally on both the physical inheritance of the mercury, the lead, whatever it is, and the epigenetic. You get genes that get turned on, triggered.
Yes.
So we have physical inheritance of the toxins, like my own family.
Right.
And then we have the epigenetic inheritance, 4 generations. What are we going to change? This is a cellular issue. So these toxins, let's move on to R2.
Okay.
Okay.
So we've got R1 from a couple
Removing
of different
these sources that
perspectives.
we talked
Right.
about. R2 is regenerating the cell membrane. Research now shows that layer of fat, that cell membrane, is your cell's interaction to its outer world. So you turn on and off genes based on the health of that membrane. So in other words, when we regenerate the membrane, now we have the ability to turn off the obesity gene.
And so that membrane is
whatever other
best
gene.
regenerated. It's a fatty lipid
It is.
2-layer. How do we get the fats? How do we regenerate it?
Well, we're gonna end up somewhere where I don't know. It's a good topic. I mean, fat plays a critical role. Right?
Yeah.
Certain fats and
More fat.
right,
Lots
and
of
it's
fat.
and it's fats. That many of your viewers actually would say, "Oh my gosh, I would think those are bad fats," and I'll just throw them out here. The saturated fat in cholesterol, I would have to say that most of your viewers would say those. If I said name 2 really bad fats, they would name both of those, right? Cholesterol and saturated fat, they're demonized. However, when you look at the studies, they're the 2 fats that stabilize not just that membrane,
Right.
but your hormone receptors. So this is the cell membrane. Here's the little receptors that your hormones have to attach to get their message in the cell. So let's use thyroid hormone as an example. That's, if that can't connect with your cell, you're not going to lose weight very well.
Right.
You're going to gain weight. So what happens is these little receptors here, when those get blunted due to inflammation, typically driven by toxins, you can't get the hormone to connect and get its message in the cell. But here's the problem: that when this membrane inflames, now you start turning on bad genes, and now you don't have the ability to turn off the bad ones. So if we fix the membrane, then we can fix the DNA. But let me close the loop because I asked about the fat. Those hormone receptors, they ride on something called a lipid raft. Simply put, a raft made of fat. The 2 most dominant fats there are saturated fat and cholesterol. They stabilize the hormone raft, the balancing of it. So they stabilize the membrane. They control the fluidity of the
Right.
membrane, which means how you move things in and out of a cell, how you detox the cell, how you let toxins out that your cell creates inherently when it makes energy.
So where do you
Lot-
get your saturated fats from? Where do you?
I love ghee. I love
Yes.
ghee. And, you know, I love because it's a saturated fat that has also something in it called short chain fatty acids, butyric acid, and that's
Yeah.
good for your gut. It's good for the membrane.
How much ghee do you eat a day?
You know, I almost eat it every day, you
Yeah.
know, probably a tablespoon, but
Yeah.
I would say that, you know, not just ghee, but even grass-fed butters, which
Mm-hmm.
are easier to get today, have great saturated fats and cholesterol. Grass-fed anything, whether
Yeah.
it's, you know, grass-fed cheese, grass-fed animal, meat, grass-fed, you name it.
So you're getting all of these good fats into the membrane of the cell.
Yes.
And that's number 2 of the
Yes,
R's.
You got it.
Okay.
R3. You have to restore cellular energy. I was in a room of scientists, and the subject of detox came up, and one of them said, and I think he's one of the most brilliant biochemists around, and you know, in our modern time. And he said the key to detox is increasing cellular energy. And I came out of my chair because he didn't know I had 5 R's, and R number 3 was restoring cellular energy. You know, I mean, it's the cornerstone of how you do everything. You need a certain amount of ATP to make something called glutathione that your cell uses to detox itself, protect itself. You need a certain amount of energy to run every pathway in the cell that is about detox. You need energy for everything, right? So oftentimes the most sensitive people who just aren't getting well, they just lack cellular energy. So there's many strategies. We'll talk about some of the dietary strategies that affect the mitochondria and how we produce this energy. You know, there's obviously certain products that I feel are really good there too, but you have to restore cellular energy. And then R4, I think, is the obvious. You have to reduce cellular inflammation. And I think when we look, everybody today has heard inflammation is the cause of every disease, chronic disease, right? Inflammation. But we think of inflammation as the sore shoulder, but that's inflammation. But we're talking about cellular inflammation. And I made the analogy earlier that the cell, the receptors to the hormones, when inflammation gets around the cell, mostly driven by toxins, right? Blunts those receptors. And now we're hormone resistant. Now we can incorporate diabetes, thyroid hormone, estrogen, testosterone. The world right now, well, the United States at least I could speak for, it is very in vogue to take bioidentical hormones, or hormones period, right? Would you agree with that?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And here's the analogy I like to give, that we shout at our kids. Now, I'll give those who don't have kids another analogy, but you know, those of us have kids have experienced this. You know, you shout at your kids, it works in the beginning, right? Meaning that they listen, they go, oh my gosh, but then it stops working, right? You find yourself shouting louder and louder. That's analogous of giving hormones. It works kind of in the beginning. You feel a little bit better, right? Not completely, but a little bit better, but then it stops. Then you try taking more hormones, shouting louder. And then you find yourself going, it's not working, you know? And then oftentimes we have to whisper, right? But that's when we reduce the inflammation. Now the receptor is working. Now you don't need more hormones. Matter of fact, the key to longevity and health is having low hormone levels that are very, able to communicate with the cell. So that's the key. That's the key to weight loss. That's the key to hormonal feeling good, right? Is we don't want to take more hormones. We want to get our cells hearing the hormones. Therefore, you have to reduce that inflammation. All right, to finish the loop, just to 5 R's is, R5 is reestablishing methylation. I talked about that with the study at Duke. You need that glutathione that your cell uses to get rid of toxins. Methylation parallels it. So as methylation drops, your cell's ability to detox drops. So glutathione drops. Now here's the problem. All stress, physical, chemical, or emotional, depletes methylation. So I use my wife as the example. She had chemical stress. The lead was depleting her methylation, and thereby her hormones weren't right. She wasn't getting rid of toxic estrogen. So we did a hormone test, 24-hour urine, and her toxic estrogens were off the chart.
Wow.
And her methylation was tanked. So she lacked these methyl groups. Now she wasn't able to get rid of toxins, period, but one of which was just toxic estrogen. We were giving her active methyl donors, but we had to get rid of the stress.
So how does that, for the layperson who's watching this right now, how do we apply that concept of the fifth R into our own lives?
Yeah, I mean, there's many products now with B12 active, like there's different forms of B12, methylcobalamin. And another one is hydroxycobalamin. Some people do better with that form than methylcobalamin, you know, and so it's different for everybody.
So if you're eating food, and we know that our B vitamins sort of grab the energy out of the food and help us to utilize that energy. If we're taking B vitamins and we're not noticing B12, for example, we're not noticing a benefit, that's when you start to pay attention to which type you're taking?
Yeah, because it's going to definitely be a more absorbable for you. You know, a challenged gut is going to affect how you absorb some of these precursors and B vitamins, right? And then that can affect methylation, right? So to answer your question is I think we need to support it, just like I was doing on my wife.
Right.
But here's the missing component. We learned what upstream meant.
Right.
You have to go upstream. And I find this is where a lot of practitioners drop the ball. So in other words, you're trying to fix your methylation and you still have 4 amalgam fillings that contain mercury. You're trying to fix your methylation and you're in a bad relationship and you're emotionally stressed. Good luck, right? I mean, it's so you have to evaluate all of your stressors, physical, chemical, or emotional. And chemical, as I pointed out, starts in the womb, right? So generational toxicity. I would argue even the same for emotional. That can be stuff that you gain back here, right? Evaluate it all. I got my life back by getting upstream to the stressor. You know, fortunately, I didn't have a lot of emotional stuff, but I sure bioaccumulated a lot of chemicals.
Yeah. So those are the 5 R's that we can all focus on. And where do we go? Where do we go from there? So it's about this upstream detox. How long did it take for it to work for you? And when did things start to really change?
You know, I call this true cellular detox. That's kind of the term.
I love that.
There's phases, right? There's a prep phase where we prepare the pathways, right? The liver, the kidneys, the gut, the lymph. I mean, you want to get that prepared for drainage. We want to prepare certain functions of the cell. Then there's a body phase where our goal is to just remove what's easy to get, so to speak, and set up something called concentration. And I don't want to bore people with the science, but things move from higher concentration to lower. That's the way a lot of toxins move. So in the body phase, which could last a month, so the prep phase could be a month or 2. And then we move into a body phase, which could be 3 or 4 months. But we want to set up that concentration gradient, setting us up for the most important phase of all. And that's a brain phase, which I call it. That's where we have to get these deep-rooted toxins out of the brain, out of the deep tissue. And I always say, for most people who have challenges, that's years, not months. You know, it's like something that I like people to learn the process, so they just do it. They make it part of their life. You know, getting those, and again, that's upstream to the cell is really what I'm talking about.
So you're saying learn it for our lives. What are the things that would be done on a weekly or a monthly basis that you think really make a big difference?
You know, I have 3 components to what I call real detox. Component number 1 is we could put the 5 R's that we just learned right there. All of those things, we have to get the cell function working. That's where real detox is. If there's any message that we get you to understand, it's that. And then the second component is making sure these things, the pathways below, the drainage stay open. That's different for everybody, right? But we have to keep the pathway open. And then the last thing is using real binders. And this is a whole subject here, because people think that chlorella, cilantro, or these different herbals are real true chelators or binders. They're not. They may bind up certain things well, but when we're dealing with things like heavy metals, biotoxins from mold, which we mentioned, you need a real binder, a real chelator. And, you know, that's another subject, you know, really, because, you know, again, there's many of them. You know, even alpha lipoic acid can go into deep tissue and be a real binder. Things like DMSA, DMPS, EDTA, you know, I mean, all of these things that most of your viewers have heard of are binders, and they're real binders, but they have to be used correctly. And that's the thing. People take them once or twice,
Yeah.
and it can create more disruption. Even IVs, you get one, and then the chelator goes away very quickly, and then metal starts to redistribute. So you have to keep people on these binders within that whole system. So a lot of docs, they'll use a real binder, but they don't do it with upregulating cell function. They don't do it with keeping the pathways open. See, so real detox, you have to do all the three of those things.
How much of the obesity, overweight epidemic that we're experiencing in this country, 60% of us
Yeah.
are dealing with one of the two. How much of it do you think relates to the toxicity deep within our cells?
I'm glad you asked that question because I believe today it's a number larger than I probably even believe. I think I read a study. It was saying that type 2 diabetes, they believe that 30 to 35% of it's toxin related. And then when you add the autoimmune, the toxin's ability to turn on a gene, it could be up to 80%.
Wow.
So when we look at the real reason why people have what I like to term weight loss resistance, meaning you've changed your diet. Maybe you can't stick to a diet. None of that's your fault because it's a hormonal issue. I just seem like I can't stay on a diet. That's a hormonal problem. It seems like I am on the perfect diet. I eat better than my friends, and I still can't lose weight despite all my exercise, the perfect diet. That's a hormonal problem, but it's a hormonal problem driven by toxins. So to go back to when I did the receptor of the hormone on a cell, if the hormones aren't able to get their message in the cell, you're not losing weight. Thyroid hormone. Let me just use that as an example for people because it's such an epidemic. People have thyroid issues and their blood work's normal. By the time their blood work is off, 20 years with the problem. So just imagine, T4 is typically the hormone doctors give for, whether it's thyroxine, synthroid, and T4 needs to be converted to an active form called T3, and that's the one that gets in the cell and makes you feel good, right? Makes you burn fat as energy, stay lean, all that, brain works great. Unfortunately, a lot of people can't make the conversion from T4 to T3. Well, look what interferes there. Toxic liver. You don't convert well. Toxins like mercury can bind up selenium. You need selenium to make that conversion. So there's many ways toxin interferes. Oh, and here's how it interferes too. It affects the pituitary. I said that the mercury accumulates in the pituitary that controls the thyroid that makes the T4. So toxins can affect it here. Toxins can affect the conversion. And one more, I said that here's the membrane of the cell, right? Toxins make their way in, attach to the membrane and the receptor, blunt the receptor via inflammation. Now the T3, even if you convert it, can't get its message in the cell. So you see multiple ways. That's one hormone. I could talk about leptin. Leptin's a hormone that tells you not to eat, and it helps you be a fat burner. Leptin has to attach to the same receptors in your hypothalamus, right? So if leptin can't get its message in because of toxins driving it, and we know toxins have an affinity for these leptin receptors. So many places along the hormone pathway is where toxins interfere. So the reason people can't lose weight now, it's a hormone issue. And most people intuitively know that, by the way, but it's a hormone issue being driven by a toxic upstream problem.
What do you say about intermittent fasting? Because there's so many women that are afraid of intermittent fasting because of the concern around hormones, and you do this all the time.
It's a great question. I mean, so my cellular detox, I teach it to practitioners in what I call a multi-therapeutic approach. And one of the categories is these ancient healing strategies like fasting, intermittent fasting, ketosis, all of which are part of this ancient healing that, again, when you put it with the cellular work, it's magic happens. People get well. People that are well get better, put it that way. So these are great topics. First of all, fasting, I believe, harnesses the innate intelligence that's in us, all of us, upon conception. And that intelligence knows how to heal. We have to remove the interference for the body to heal. Fasting harnesses that intelligence and allows it to bring us to what we call homeostasis, perfect balance. That's where all healing takes place. When you just give the body nothing, number one, you're resting the GI. It's able to heal. It's huge. Every time you eat, you create a stress on your cells. It's just the way it is. People, we can't argue with the science around eating less, you live longer, right? The problem with that is, in America, we think eating less means I'm gonna eat half my meal. It's not what ancient cultures did. They all ate less, no doubt, but they ate less by eating less often. That's the word intermittent fasting. You know, about eating 1 or 2 meals a day and how that optimizes our hormones, a word that you love and adore, autophagy. Even in a 15-hour fast, so let's just say you skip breakfast, you're losing bad cells, losing debris, the toxins. Your body is so smart. That innate intelligence is so smart. It'll literally burn the bad DNA out first, the bad cells, the weak mitochondria. Use that as protein. People always say, oh, you need protein. Well, yeah, you do. Your body will take bad tissue, bad muscle, and break it down into amino acids and utilize that. That's brilliance. Bodybuilders are learning by doing this, right? They can actually build more muscle, right? It's like they eat in a smaller window, get this growth hormone rise. It's hormone optimization. Burn out bad DNA, allow them to build better muscle, right? All of this we've learned in the last, I don't know, whatever years, but it's fascinating what happens. So intermittent fasting is something we take very sick people through, and it optimizes their hormones. But to your point, how many hours someone can go can change, and it's different for everybody. So we look at kind of glucose and ketone levels as a judge to how long. Let's start out 12 hours, 15, and then we can change that fasting amount of time as their cells get more fat adapted. The ability hormonally to use fat as energy, now they can go longer and longer, and your body goes, I haven't eaten today. I don't know what time it is right now, but it's hours after most people have eaten. I haven't eaten. I haven't even thought about food because I'm fat adapted. I'm feeding from 50,000 stored calories. When you're not fat adapted, matter of fact, I'll say this, most Americans, your cells can only use 2 things for energy, right? Sugar or fat. Most Americans are stuck as sugar burners. So here's what happens when you're a sugar burner, and this is most of you. Because of toxins and because of the standard American diet. So your body needs sugar. So either you have a craving you can't resist because it says, I need that bread.
Right.
Or if you force yourself not to eat, it says, okay, I can't burn fat, so I'm gonna just break your muscle down and into sugar, and then it uses that. So that doesn't work either. But when we fix the cell, we can get the body to become that efficient fat burner again, with the ability now to use fat when it's not eating. Now you don't get the cravings, right? Now your body uses fat and not muscle. But the cellular detox, and then what I like to call mitochondrial fitness. We force people to go a little bit more in their day without eating, okay? Or we put them into ketosis. Ketosis is forcing the cell to use fat as energy. But I'm gonna say this, because many of your viewers said, yeah, I did ketosis. Number 1, I had trouble getting in ketosis. Or number 2, I didn't lose weight. Or I lost 5 pounds, maybe 8, and I stopped. Even though I'm a fat burner, what's up with that? Well, there's a lot of reasons for that. So what we do is we will put people, and I learned this actually, ironically enough, I put a lot of people into this ketosis where their cells are using fat and learned that they're not losing weight. So I started going, okay, let's just put you back into a higher healthy carbohydrate diet. And all of a sudden they would go, and that's the diet that they were on before I put them in ketosis, and they'd go, oh yeah, I actually lost another 8 pounds when that happened. I'm like, really? But you were on that diet before and you didn't lose weight. That's interesting. So then I said, okay, let's do that for 3 months. And now let's put you back into ketosis again. And then magically they went back into ketosis and they went, oh, this time I'm losing weight. That's odd. Okay, so, I realized that the dietary shifts, certain adaptation was happening at the cell. And now all of a sudden they broke through weight loss resistance. That's a concept that I now call diet variation or feast-famine cycles. So now we'll take days that we eat the pasta, maybe high carbohydrate diets or days, along with days where we eat very little. We intermittent fast. Maybe we eat one meal that day, maybe not at all that day. But that variation we've learned actually creates adaptation. The cells can adapt. So here's a saying I love to give: bad cells don't adapt. Good cells get stronger. So when you force those shifts, you're creating the good cells, the mitochondria get better. It's mitochondrial fitness. Therefore, you become a more efficient fat burner. And then what happens is the bad cells die off. They can't make that adaptation. So to pull it all like this into a little one point, ancient cultures were forced to change their diet. We aren't today. So I believe that the vegetarians are right. I believe that the paleo people are right. I believe that the keto people are right. But I believe that being forced into times of any of those changes is the magic. So you look at the Hunza people, right? One of the healthiest, longest living people on the planet. They thought they were vegetarians when they visited them in the summer because they were mostly vegetarians. In the winter, they were in ketosis. They were high fat, higher proteins. I mean, so seasonally, back in the day, they were forced to shift their diets. Fasting has been around as a healing modality longer than anything, right? But I believe it's underutilized. Again, I'll repeat it, not just me, but the hundreds of doctors I've been able to teach. We would never be able to help the people we helped if it wasn't for extended water fasts. And there's broth fasts that I think are good. I mean, all of them have different qualities. I think you get the most autophagy through the pure water fast. There's partial fasts or fasting mimicking diets.
Right.
Just bringing your calories down. All huge benefits, no doubt. They're all tools. Intermittent fasting daily, just skipping breakfast, that's a tool. And I have to, and then diet variation's another tool. So I have to answer this question because it's sticking in my mind. I know people need to hear this. You said that people with thyroid or hormone problems think that I can't fast. And they've been told that, right? Haven't they? Even intermittent fasting daily? Diet variation is the answer. So women would say the week before my period or maybe the week of a period, I can't intermittent fast. Matter of fact, I crave chocolate. I can't even stay in ketosis. I want to eat carbs. So my instinct on that is do it.
Yeah.
Something innate intelligence is saying do it. And so do it. I don't know the answer yet, but do it. So when I thought about this, I said, okay, let's diet variation. Instead of taking 1 or 2 days a week and giving high carbs as a variation strategy that I talked about earlier, let's do a whole week. Let's do it that week of cravings. So we started doing that. Transformed hormonally these people. And this applies to men too. You just kind of have to guess your week. But you take a week every month and you do high healthy carbs. Watch what happens. Now all of a sudden, boom, you're in ketosis, higher and burning fat better than ever on the backside. The body's so smart. If fat is its only energy source for a long enough period of time, it's going to want to do what? Conserve it. So it's so smart. From the DNA of the cell, it sends a signal to the insulin receptor and blunts it. It just lowers its function. Why? To store fat. It's all your body wants to do is survive, right? So it blunts the insulin receptor to hold on to fat. It's fuel source. It's like if you lived in the woods and you had a stack of wood and the winter's getting colder and your wood pile's small, you're going to burn less wood. That's your metabolism going like this. But if someone dumped off a new load of wood, you're going to start firing it up again. That's the high carb days, right? So when you throw the week of carbohydrates in, man, you make hormone conversions better and you remind your body it's not starving. Even 1 or 2 days a week, throw high carbs and you remind your body it's not starving. And it goes, okay, we're good. Let's burn the fat. But these diet variation strategies that I'm telling you, we learned most of it clinically. The bodybuilders used to practice some of this, because they knew the high carb, the low, they knew that variation created some hormonal adaptation that allowed us to be able to start burning fat again. And probably a lot of it is just the body's innate ability to survive. And we break that down, we tell it has plenty. So tell your body it has plenty. Watch what happens. Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this fascinating information. And I think for each and every one of us that's heard your interview, we can apply immediately. Learn and apply and try and see how it works.
Yeah, I hope so.
Yeah.
If I'm not making a difference, I don't know what I'm doing, from pain to purpose.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Amazing, because again, every single guest we try to bring to you, and every single person you've done such an incredible job interviewing, you can see that there's a personal reason for their beginning the journey, taking the journey to the next step, and making sure that they share that journey with others. I gotta make sure I make that point to you guys at home. You know that you can share this, and that's the kind of video you should be clicking the share button on right now, right?
You're right. Dan Pompa is so incredible in just the way that he took this personal tragedy that so many people would break down with and funnel that and drive that into what he now is able to do, which is transform thousands and thousands of people's lives, but he does it again in such a meaningful way.
And we've given you example after example of people who are using a combination. They make this fit. The ketogenic diet doesn't have to be at 100%, but we want you at least 50 to 60%, and then mold that into your lifestyle the same way these other people are, and I'll guarantee you, you'll get the same kind of benefits. Well, look, the next guest is Dr. Zach Bush. And this is so interesting, and a lot of people really need to hear this. What's he do?
Dr. Zach Bush is absolutely one of my favorite interviews because what he does is something that most people can't do. He is a triple board certified MD.
Holy moly.
And his breadth and depth, it's so remarkable. And what he teaches us is all about the biome, the microbiome, the gut biome, and how we really...
Yes. Slow down, because where we go. I want to make sure people at home get this. The
Yes.
gut biome?
Yes.
And what does that mean?
Well, you're going to hear from him.
Okay, well, then let's do it. And then you've got to explain some more.
Yes.
Take a look at this.
Dr. Zach Bush, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us some of the incredible research and work that you've done over your career.
Thank you. I appreciate being here with you.
You are a triple board certified medical doctor. Tell us a little bit about what got you there and why it's such a rare place to be.
It was certainly not a linear journey. You don't leave high school thinking, I want to do 20 years of school. That was not something that I preconceived. It was a journey that really took me from a real rough understanding where the medical field was at the time. I had a general concept of what a doctor was. I had the opportunity to birth some babies in the Philippines with a group of midwives that got me really interested in medicine in the first place. And that journey took me down this avenue of wanting to, do good, like every physician does, this really altruistic mission of, bring health and hope and healing to people. And we go in with, I think, a very pure and altruistic plan. And then as you dive into this medical environment where you're suddenly steeped in a level of chronic disease and acute disease that's really unfathomable at this point. You walk into a current hospital setting, it looks like all control, but the reality under the surface is our population has become sicker than ever in human history over a short period of time, 20 years. Mm-hmm. And so I entered this industry right at the beginning of this total collapse of human health within America, where we started to see chronic disease burdens going up tenfold compared to historical rates. And that led to this experience of, do we even have the tools available to help address the problems that we're seeing? And so I knew I was kind of failing to find those in the internal medicine environment, which was my first board specialty. And then from there went into endocrinology and metabolism, thinking if I could start to understand the regulation of the human body, what's the communication network look like that coordinates such a complex thing like a human organism, that perhaps I would find those tools. And it was exciting to me to realize that hormones were a natural approach that the body makes and all these things. And so I was giving hormones in high doses, especially things like insulin for diabetes, and finding out over the course of 6-7 years of practice in that environment that I was actually making my patients sicker and not better with hormones that were supposed to be from the body, that were supposed to deliver this kind of intrinsic health, was missing the boat again. And in that journey, I started to study cancer, which was a lot of the maturation of the rest of my career. But in that journey towards cancer, I realized in the fundamentals of my research that nutrition had been a massive missing piece of my equation. And so as things kind of continued to evolve with my science career, I started to realize that the tools that I had been given were completely missing the root cause of why the diseases were happening. Cancer, for example, has never occurred. There's not a single cancer that's ever occurred in the human body because of a lack of chemotherapy. right? And so that realization of here I am designing chemotherapy, and I'm literally designing tools that could not in any shape or form reach the root cause of why this person has cancer. So what's the chance that I'm going to keep that person cancer-free even if we get this cancer into remission? The answers are zero. You can't get there. And so in that journey, I ultimately turned to my third subspecialty, which was hospice and palliative care, thinking this was the most rewarding thing I'd experienced to date at that point, which was I know I can be present with a human being when they make this next transition. And so I saw some of my deepest reward coming out of that end-of-life care. And so that was kind of the thing that got me through, I think, as my academic career shut down and I stopped doing the cancer research and the chemotherapy development. This hospice and palliative care thing became a passion that I knew I was bringing something positive by just me being present as a physician, willing to hold space with a person, and that became a touchstone that kept me going through some years where I really suffered some major depression and everything else, realizing that my 20-year journey into major debt with medical schools and specialties after that and everything else, and this kind of altruistic crisis of like, I don't have the tools that I meant to bring, and I don't have the pieces that are going to relieve the suffering of my patients. Instead, the tools that I've been given seem to accelerate their suffering, even though I can make them look good on paper. I can make their blood sugars look good, I can make their blood pressure look good, I can make their cholesterol look good with all these drugs, but at each step the person gets more and more separated from their natural capacity to heal as I layered on the pharmaceutical drugs.
So you had this realization that the tools that you were using, the tools that had been used, just were not getting to that root cause. So you spoke a little bit about nutrition. Can you tell us a little more about how nutrition relates to the health of a being?
Yeah, you would think this would be so innate in our training as healers or physicians or scientists even. But what is nutrition? Nutrition is ultimately the delivery of building blocks that will allow for a human body or any physical body, whether it's an animal in the feedlots or wherever you are. The nutrition is really the substrate that goes on to allow the innate blueprint of biology to become a human body. And the extraordinary plasticity of our genome increasingly becomes revealed over the science as the science continues to evolve. We now know that at the molecular level, down at the DNA level, where we kind of come out of this blueprint into a human body, we have huge options. Today, my genome, which will be static for my life as far as the genes that are there, I was handed by my parents. But from those genes, I can make 4 million different bodies, because each gene can make over 200 different protein structures depending on its environment.
Interesting.
And the biggest environmental factor there is the nutrition. So your nutrition today, what you put in your mouth today, is literally who you are becoming. It is shaping everything from your consciousness of who you are, to the metabolism at which you burn calories, to the way in which you store fat instead of burning it for fuel, the way in which your metabolism can crush down and turn into an inflammatory mess and evolve into chronic disease. All of these things are determined first and foremost, in my opinion, by nutrition. What are we putting in our bodies from the outside world? And then that has an immediate impact on who we become.
What are the top few things when you look at nutrition? What are the things that we're doing wrong? And what would be the couple of things that we could quickly change that would have a huge impact on our health and well-being?
So the number one is the care of the microbiome. The microbiome has become a word that has been crafted pretty recently in the nomenclature. So really in the last 15 years, we've created this concept of the microbiome. It's a description of the ecosystem of tiny bacteria, fungi, parasites, viruses that make up this invisible biology around us. That microbiome, it turns out, is really the predictor of how we prevent and treat and manage disease in our bodies. Ultimately, it's also the opportunity for us to cure a human condition of collapse. If we plug back into this ecosystem, we see incredible capacity to heal in the human body. And so number one is our care for that. So what are we doing wrong? We're doing something wrong fundamentally in our nutrition by the way in which we raise this food. And it's steeped in antibiotic at every level. The main chemical that's been used over the last 30 years to grow our food is this chemical called glyphosate, which is the active ingredient in Roundup. It has a potent ability to block the enzymes that build the protein structures that will become everything from neurotransmitters to hormones to all kinds of different compounds that are used in our body. So this Roundup chemical, which everybody's kind of familiar with as a weed killer, has actually never been patented as a weed killer. It's been patented as an antibiotic, antiviral, antifungal. All these different organisms are killed by this chemical. And so we are now raising, through genetic modification of our food chain, food that can be sprayed directly with this chemical glyphosate. The result is our soils are drenched in a chemical that are killing the microbiome, killing the ecodiversity in our soil, which means that our food itself is nutrient deprived because they would ultimately receive it from the soil being given to it by the fungi and the bacteria in the soil. And so our plants are deficient, which means they're weakened in their immune system and in their vital life, which means they're going to be prone to disease, they're going to be pests, they're going to be prone to invasive species of weeds that can move in on them and everything else. And so they require a higher and higher demand for chemical warfare, or these chemical herbicides and pesticides. You know, the typical glass of wine in California now has over 64 herbicides and pesticides in it. That's just a microcosm of the food chain. You take a bite of a hamburger at a typical restaurant, you've got all kinds of chemicals. Current estimates is that if you go to a fast food chain and pick up a hamburger, it's going to take you 7 years to digest all the chemicals in that one hamburger.
Wow.
And so there's just this load of toxin being added to our food chain that, number one, is killing the microbiome, and then number two, giving a huge chemical load to the body. So that's number one. Number two is, what are we doing to the food at the genetic level? And this goes way beyond this concern for GMO. This is actually, what is the normal inherent genetics of the plant or the animal that we're about to consume doing right before we eat it? Imagine for a moment an animal that's being raised in a feedlot, and so you may have a cow that was raised in a grass-fed kind of bucolic space for the first 9 months of its life, and then suddenly it's shipped on a crammed, noisy trailer across some great distance to a feedlot, and is suddenly fed a high-intensity grain diet, which the cow intestines were never intended for, and they start to develop acidosis of the gut, chronic pain and bloating. They start to lose the ability for their immune system to work. They're crammed together in pens. They're standing in their own feces up to the level of the knees at times. You just have this tragic separation from their nature, and they're frightened, they're lonely. They behave a lot in a feedlot like you would see an autistic child, overwhelmed by its environment, can't make eye contact, frightened from everything. So this animal is stressed out to the nth degree when it goes to butcher, at age 14, 15 months of age. The more extreme version is now a piece of chicken that you're about to consume. Those chickens, by and large, are raised, in stacks of 8, 10, 12 chickens in these cages where they can't even turn around. Their beaks have been removed so that they can't peck themselves to rawness, and so they are in these incredibly inhumane environments, and their genome is stressed to the nth degree. Their genome is literally screaming fight or flight from the moment of birth, and they are butchered at 6 weeks of age. I don't know if your viewers know this, but we go from chick to full-grown broiler chicken in 6 weeks. We've bred these chickens into this incredible fast rate of development, but by that time, 6 weeks, we've lost a third of the flock to invasive infection. And so these birds are so weakened and their immune systems are almost non-existent, and the whole time their genome is screaming fight or flight, fight or flight, fight or flight. And what we just found out in the last few years is that the genome is making these little things called microRNA that travel with the food or in the bloodstream or in the breath, and these things can go communicate with other organisms. A third of the microRNA that are going to determine which genes I turn on today in my bloodstream right now are not from my human source. They're from bacteria, fungi, and ultimately from the food that I eat, which would be a chicken or a beef or a vegetable. So we're speaking here about kind of this fight or flight state of the animals, and as soon as we consume that, those microRNA will go and tend to trigger the same response in our bodies. And so we don't know why our children and our adults are going through this massive epidemic of anxiety. We have panic attacks happening usually in the car. And so imagine the woman who goes, grabs a quick chicken salad for lunch, is about to go pick up the kids from school, and suddenly is having a panic attack out of nowhere. And there's nothing stressful in her life right now. Things seem to be fine, but she thinks she's about to die. She thinks that there's paranoia and fear that just can't be escaped. She's literally maybe experiencing what that animal that she just consumed was sending the message into their own genome, and we've eaten that now. We can say the same thing about the plant kingdom. What does it feel like to be in an ear of corn that is in the middle of a 10 million acre farm of genetically modified corn that has lost most of its nutrient capacity to fuel something. That corn, I believe, may have a spiritual sense of identity and purpose. That corn might say, I'm here to be an ear of corn today. And yet that's been stolen away, and instead of being in nature, it's in this monoculture. There's thousands and thousands of rows of just the same plant over and over again, and it's not there to even feed human beings. It's not even there to be a nutrient source. It's there to be torn up and crushed and then processed into a million different food additives that'll be more and more toxic as it gets divided away from its natural source. And so our food at every level has been separated from its nature, and we wonder why we are suffering so greatly. And so, broad brushstrokes, we've done two major things wrong. Number one, we've killed the microbiome that would have fed us the nutrition that we're looking for. And number two, we have stressed those plants and animals out that we're about to consume to the point where they deliver fear and anxiety as much as they would nutrients.
So we're living in this world where we've been disconnected from our nature, and we're trying very hard to deal with obesity. We're trying very hard to deal with all of the neurodegenerative diseases and everything that we're dealing with. And yet, where do we get the tools? How do we have any sort of hope for where the tools could be? How does that work?
So the industry is maturing quickly, is the fortunate thing. Humans are incredibly creative and ingenious, and I give great hope in my life to this reality, is that when we find a problem and identify the problem well, and we communicate that between people, solutions pop up all over the place. We have the largest humanitarian crisis that's ever happened in human history happening today, mostly in our children. To put it in perspective, in the 1960s, we had a chronic disease burden in our U.S. population that was around 4%. From cradle to grave, 4% of the people had chronic disease. Today in the United States, our children under the age of 12 carry a chronic disease burden of 46%.
Say that one more time.
46% children under the age of 12.
Less than 50, 60 years later?
Yes, and so in 2 or 3 generations, we've gone from almost non-existent chronic disease in children to half of our children with a chronic disease by the time they're 12. And unfortunately, a lot of these are neurologic, right? Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, major depression, anxiety disorders, and children that are pre-pubertal even.
Right.
You know, and so we have this massive neurologic stress going on, and then of course we have the autism phenomenon. We've moved from 1 in 5,000 children in 1975 to 1 in 44 today. Wow. 1 in 5,000 to 1 in 44 in a short period of time. And a lot of people in my medical industry who hear that statistic say, well, we must just diagnose autism. We're more aware of it than we were then. And so we are in this state of denial. My first response is, well, you've never sat in an exam room with an autistic child then. You don't miss this in 1975, that the child is now 4 years old, nonverbal, can't make eye contact, and to console itself, hits its head against the wall for 4 or 5 hours a day. This is not subtle. This is a tragedy at the human level that we are ignoring as a medical practice or a medical world because we don't know why it's happening and we don't have solutions to it. And so we have just a human defense mechanism of denial, I believe. The other big proof that this is not a new or not some diagnostic misconception on statistics is that the fastest rate of growth in our autism burden happened between 2012 and today. And so in the last 6 years, we've seen this explosion going vertical. And so just in 3 years, 2012 to 2015, we doubled our rates of autism in the country. And so we have this vertical growth.
So in 3 years, we've doubled the rates of it.
1 in 88 in 2012 to 1 in 44 3 years later. So it's a rate of burden that if we extrapolate this out to where we're headed, so what does that mean? Where are we going in 5, 10, 15 years? In the next 16 years at the current rate, and that's just 2 United States presidents. We're just talking about just a couple of legislative cycles away, we will see 1 in 3 children with an autism spectrum disorder. At that point, what is the likelihood of that generation will go on to a fiscally sustainable future? Is it possible that my children, as healthy kids, will be able to sustain that level of disease burden in their peers or their generation below them, and at the same time manage the highest degree of chronic disease in the largest geriatric population that's ever lived? And so we have the end of fiscal sustainability and financial wellness of this nation 16 years out. And we have heard no political discourse on this. We've heard no economic plan for how we're going to dig our way out of this thing. And so we are at a state where my hope lies entirely in the consumer and the entrepreneur who meet the consumer's demand. My excitement about being on programs like this is we have to get the information and the people that can change the world instantly. And ultimately those people are not legislators, they're not big businesses, they're not even the scientists, they're ultimately the consumer that needs to say, my children are sick. My children have asthma, eczema, food allergies, food sensitivities. My children have mood disorder. As parents, we need to wake up and say, this is what we're facing. And as consumers, we can instantly change that environment by demanding and ultimately participating in a different social structure.
The food guidelines that so many people look to sort of make the decisions of what we're ingesting, how do we make the moves to start to transform the health of ourselves and our children? And what would be the piece of guidance that you would give us?
It's so exciting, and really, I mean, in some ways it feels completely daunting as a parent today. How could I possibly steer my kids through this environment to get them to some sort of nutritional wellness? What would be the path there? But the reality is we only have to back up 30 years. We don't have to go back to paleo times to find out how to eat healthy, right? And so if we back up just 60 years, we go back to the end of World War II, there was the great call for the victory gardens. The mission was, if you're a patriot, you're going to grow a garden in your backyard and you're going to grow some food. By the end of World War II, we're growing 45% of our food chain in our backyard gardens. Now we grow less than 1/10% in our backyard gardens. And so we have completely outsourced our food, and so we lost control of it. We created Monsanto, we created the new Bayer with their new GMO, we created these massive entities by outsourcing, by dropping our own personal sense of responsibility or opportunity, if you will, to be in touch with the food. So how do you navigate it? You just connect back to the food itself. How do you do that? You start to participate in the production of the food. So that might be for you just growing one mint plant in your window in your apartment in New York City. Or it might be, you know what, I've got this little plat of grass right out front of my townhouse. I could plant 1 or 2 tomato plants and a couple basil plants in there. Or you might have a backyard and you could put in, enough zucchini to not only provide fresh zucchini and squash to your family, but to the whole block within a year or two. We need to take back participation. I don't even think it needs us to grow 45% of the food chain again. We need to understand what food production looks like and understand what nurture feels like from Mother Earth again, and we will start to make discerning, obvious decisions about what we're putting in our mouth.
What is the connection between the microbiome and our metabolism? Because we hear so much as we're dealing with obesity and this becoming, and is already obviously an epidemic. We hear so much about, oh, my metabolism has slowed down, or whatever it may be. And like you said, when you bring it even to our children, the rate of diabetes for children is just so incredibly high.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we now know that the microbiome is 100% underlying all of these metabolic changes, which is relatively new. Certainly when I went through endocrine training back in the 2000s, this was not known, but by 2010 it was really clear that the microbiome was involved in some way. And now you fast forward another 8 years, we've actually started to tease out which bacteria are causing obesity. And it's a profound message to everybody listening that, you may have made some massive dietary changes in your life trying to lose weight and you're not losing the weight, or you lost a little bit and you can't get back to your ideal body weight. We've now done experiments where you take the bacteria out of somebody who's struggling with weight and you put those bacteria into the intestines of a rodent, a mouse or a rat, and that animal will become obese in a month. No change in diet, no change in caloric intake. They'll become obese because of the bacteria that are therein. What does that mean? What's happening there? We've now teased out that there are bacteria in your gut that are demanding you to eat food that you shouldn't be eating in the first place. The bacteria can actually change your behavior by the chemicals they put out in your gut and the genes that they modify in your brain.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? You're saying that we're not controlling our own behavior and the cravings, and when we're told willpower, all you have to have is some willpower. Is that even possible?
So willpower is going to come in a different format this time. Instead of you looking at failure as, I just ate that chocolate again, I'm a stupid person, I don't have any self-control or anything else, it's not you that's compelling that. If you start to move back and say, I'm a huge organism with all this living mass in my body that is trying to eat. And if you've developed the bacteria in your gut that are going to prefer a refined carbohydrate as its main intake, it's going to continue to compel you to eat that. In fact, if you go and suddenly switch and you're like, I'm just doing kale salad, well, you're going to be bloated, your inflammation may go up, you actually may feel worse switching over to a whole health plant-based diet in those first couple of weeks because you don't have the bacterial flora that want or can handle that food load. Your bacteria are used to refined carbohydrates or whatever your little niche of the diet is, and so your bacteria can create chemicals that are compelling you to stay in that zone. And then your brain, through its misconception, will reinforce that of like, oh, I feel worse when I eat that. I get more intestinal bloating when I eat that kale salad. So now you start to reinforce poor behavior, and now you start to back up and you're like, is there really a lack of self-control, or do you have all of these bacterial and neurologic signals saying, I need to keep eating what I can handle? And so number one is to realize any dietary change in your life is going to be a process. You need to retrain the ecosystem within your body to want and seek out the food you are really going to thrive on. And this happens largely through developing a relationship of the brain to the nutrients in your food. The first time you eat kale and have a complex experience there where you've got inflammation and maybe some confusion on the bacterial part, and your immune system's responding things it doesn't usually have to respond to, the brain doesn't know what's good, what's bad, what's going on. It just knows that there's been a big shift and it's trying to tease it out. But the 5th and 10th and 20th time that you introduce kale or some new ingredient in your diet, the brain starts to realize, whoa, I'm getting this nutrient load 30 minutes to 90 minutes after that food comes in that I was desperately in need of. And it can start to say, I need that. And so you can start to create these, not cravings, but actual knowledge of what the body is needing as you retrain the body. And so look at yourself as an athlete when you go to make a nutritional change. No matter what your capacity is on the track, what your capacity is to eat is really well established. You can eat an enormous amount of calories in a day. Typical American, somewhere around 2,000 calories a day. But for a lot of my women, they've dieted themselves back to 600 calories. They're now a weak organism in the sense that they don't even know how to process food efficiently. They've slowed their metabolism down through this chronic dieting process so that if they eat anything over 600 calories, they start to gain weight again. Think of yourself as an athlete that needs to retrain into a new sport. Your new sport is biodiversity in the gut, in the microbiome. So how do you train that biodiversity? There's a couple of major ways. Number one, get new nutrients into the body, because those new nutrients are going to demand different bacteria and fungi to deal with their process. So number one, train biodiversity by getting diversity on the plate.
What would we do differently when we go to the grocery store?
In the grocery store, you'd be going after colors that you're not used to seeing on the plate. And so one of my favorites is definitely the beet. It's something that was a staple through all of history, really. The beet and the sweet potato, these root vegetables that were our winter crops. This is what we survived for months of the year on, were these tubers and these big root vegetables. These were our staples, and now they become like, every nice restaurant in America now has a beet salad where they have some greens and then they have a few chunks of beet. I'm talking about eating beets, boil a beet, eat a beet, and the turnip, similar to that, another great one. And then the other roots that we are missing out on color, the radish. We toss a few little slices of radish on top of salad. We don't eat the radish, And so consuming these things in their whole amount, and a high amount of them, can really change the microbiome. Other radishes that are underutilized are like the black radish, which has got a very unique micronutrient in the skin, and then the white daikon radish, which looks like a giant white carrot. And so these are some examples there, but then you get into the fruits, right? It's things like star fruit and lychee fruit and all these things have got incredible capacity. Then you get into the herbs. The two most powerful things in the herbal world really is probably cilantro, is one of the most overlooked pieces of superfood there, and then parsley. Those two are, if you just make a routine pesto out of parsley, you can get an extraordinary superfood experience out of that. Chlorella, you start to go into the ocean environment, kelps, the seaweeds. All of these are things that are lacking in the American diet massively.
It's fascinating. So we're working on the biodiversity of our microbiome, and that for someone who's been chronically dieting or for someone who's suffering from metabolic disorders can really have a huge impact. And how long does it take to start to retrain?
So retraining happens every minute. It's interesting. This is a very plastic system. the microbiome can shift in a matter of just walking into a hotel. You get an artificial environment with highly processed air that's not getting any out. You'll change your microbiome in a few seconds. You'll suddenly breathe a bunch of fungi that grow in the air ducts of the hotel or whatever it is, and that can have an immediate shift. So these changes are happening constantly in our body. If we find ourselves from week to week, day to day, with the same biology, which might be healthy or it might be sick, and we keep saying, I'm sick, no matter what I do, I'm sick, I'm still sick, I still have diabetes, I have still this. Well, then what we know, scientifically and mathematically, is you haven't changed your environment. If from one week to the next, you are the same diseased or healthy body, you haven't changed your environment. And so the exciting thing is the plasticity. So we can walk into a hotel, change our microbiome for a moment, but to have a sustainable shift where we're going to really change into a healthy environment, we got to get back to the opposite of the hotel, which is outside in nature. So as we start to breathe nature again, we actually populate our upper respiratory tract, our sinuses, with bacteria that will ultimately seed and inform the rest of our gut, and that will become really the foundation therein. So when I talk about reseeding the gut with bacteria to my patients, we certainly speak about fermented foods, things like wild fermented sauerkrauts, kimchi, sour Reuben, kvass, all of these amazing compounds. These are great, but remember that a vast majority of the microbiome that's going to repopulate the whole upper tract is going to come through breath. And so we have our patients visit as many different ecosystems as they can as quickly as possible. So if I meet a cancer patient, I just take a quick history on their microbiome. What air do you breathe on a daily basis? And what environments do you diversify that from? And by and large, we find that they have basically three environments. They have their home, they have their workplace, and in some situations they'll have like their kids' like extracurricular environments. So they might spend a fair time in the gym because their daughter's in volleyball or whatever it is. So they have like these three kind of major ecosystems that they're in. And then you ask the simple question, which of those ecosystems looks like the nature that you developed with for the last millions of years? And the answer is none of them. A gym is never going to have a microbiome like the deep forests of Virginia where I live, and there's no way that you're going to, in your office place, experience the microbiome that's on the beaches out here in California. You are not touching the ecosystem at this microbiome level in much of your day. And so we have to make a volitional effort to re-engage that. And the exciting thing is you don't have to decide to become a nudist in a hippie colony to rebuild this thing. Tiny little moments in your day. If you got in the habit of when you finally get home from work to kick off your shoes before you get out of the car so that you have to walk barefoot in that 4 or 5 feet to the front door, that would change your microbiome. But then if you took a pause in that few steps and said, oh, there's a weed there, and you actually bent over and pulled that weed, when you pull weed, it disrupts the mycology, the fungi and the mycelium in the soil, and you breathe the intracellular environment of those mycelium, which brings all kinds of interesting enzymes into your body, nutrients, and more importantly, the spores of those fungi and bacteria that are saying, here's the earth that I was raised from, here's the earth that I can touch again, and that's the beginning of health again. So how do we start to code this all back? It sounds overwhelming, but the reality is tiny baby steps are going to revolutionize public health back to just where we were 30 years ago. Again, we don't have to go back deep in human history to find a healthier microbiome.
You've told us a lot about nutrition. Tell us about the time when we don't eat and how that impacts our health and well-being.
There's been a lot of attention recently starting to be paid to intermittent fasting and longer-term fasting. This has become an essential part of our clinic and our mission for helping human health find a new foundation. And a lot of the value in fasting has been spoken to not just in science but in religion for thousands of years. Every religion on the planet has at some point pointed to fasting as an important spiritual journey. And so it's an interesting collision of science, health, and spirituality when we start to talk about fasting. So what is fasting? Fasting is this break where you are no longer passing nutrients through the intestine. And for the typical American, you never fast. It's a really amazing study that we did at the University of Virginia back around 2000, where we took young, healthy college kids and fed them a typical American meal of pizza. And this pizza meal was about 950 calories, the typical kind of 2 slices of large pizza that a college kid would eat. And we tracked the passage of that through the intestine. And it turned out that it took 14 hours for that pizza to cross the small intestine to get to the colon. During that time, your body is absorbing nutrients, processing any healthy nutrients and chemicals that might be in the food, and having the big hormonal and metabolic response to that meal. And so now picture eating dinner at 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 at night. 14 hours later, at noon the next day, you're still processing that same pizza through your small intestine. And so you haven't even stopped eating from yesterday's dinner, and yet your brain is saying, I'm hungry again, I should eat, blah, 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 because your stomach is sending those signals, not your small intestine. It's clear that our digestive tract never anticipated that we would develop such a slow-moving food chain as we have. Our food that is high in protein and dense in animal products and then you add on chemical factors and everything else, move very slowly through the intestines. And so our body is not used to that, and so we end up eating breakfast when there's still food in our intestines from dinner the night before, and then we eat lunch, and then we eat dinner again. There is always this backlog of nutrients that are pouring into your body, which might be bad calories, they might be chemicals, they might be good calories, they might be good nutrients, but you never get a break. One of the hallmarks of our current chemical industry is that our intestinal lining is becoming permeable from damage from the chemicals in our food. With that, every meal poses a threat to the immune system. You have to mount an immune reaction. You're in a food fight every time you put food in your mouth. So now picture the situation where every drink of water, every bite of food you take is a new threat to the immune system, and you never give it a break. And so you're constantly exposing the immune system through this slow-moving gut and this constant absorption of contaminated food chain to your immune system. What is the chances you're going to catch up and rebuild your antioxidant system, your reservoir of anti-inflammatory compounds in the body? When is it that your neurologic system's not going to be in a sympathetic fight or flight state from this overwhelm? The answer is never. And so your typical teenager right now has never experienced a truly quiet gut and therefore a quiet immune system behind it. And so the immune systems are becoming revved up to the point where you can't get a breath at the immune system and everything's becoming reactive. You react to everything in your environment because your immune system's in overwhelm. Now picture a fast. Take the opportunity to give your gut silence for the first time in your life, and it is a revolution in biology. And so what we do is we train. Again, you need to think of yourself as an athlete, because if you're doing nutrition, you are doing intense work in the body. And so you are an athlete, and so you're training yourself into a healthy and effective fast. So we start with 18-hour fasting, where you eat dinner at 6 p.m., and then you eat nothing until lunch the next day. During that 18 hours, you train your body to completely empty the small intestine, to start to mobilize fat and calorie storages out of the liver, to digest some of the toxins out of there, get a foothold, start to do this. And so for a full week, try eating just from noon to 6 p.m. and don't diet, eat a full calorie load, and then fast from 6 p.m. to noon the next day. In the first couple days, you're going to find this quite easy because the typical American is so busy with email first thing in the morning that they're often not eating lunch until 10 or their first breakfast at 10 or 11. And so fasting till noon doesn't feel like much. But interestingly, as your inflammation goes down and you start to get healthier, you're going to get hungry and hungry in the morning. And so there'll be a phase where it gets more challenging to fast till noon. And then you'll start to experience, well, this just feels normal. My body knows what it's expected to do, and you'll feel well in that. At that point, once you've practiced that 18-hour fast for a week or two at a time, for many cycles, maybe a few months of that, you'll start to have the ability to go into longer-term fasting really effectively. And my next jump from there for my patients is a 5-day water fast. And that sounds incredible. You're not going to eat for 5 days. You would think that you're going to be more famished and more angry and short-tempered than you've ever been in your life, because that's how you feel just with a late lunch. And yet you're going to find out that while hungry in your first fast, you will have less and less neurologic and psychological stress because your immune system is settling down for the first time literally in your life. And your hormones are returning back towards baseline. You're literally hitting the reset button. That's an exciting new foundation to work from. But here we are with a chronic disease burden of 45%. What is it going to do for that? Can it really fix problems that are decades down the road? What if you have cancer? What if you have autoimmune disease? What are we going to do about that? The fast, again, has an incredible secret to it, which is something called autophagy. And autophagy means, in the Greek there, the self-consumption, or the consuming self. You're eating yourself, and what you're eating or consuming is damaged cells. Cells that can no longer repair themselves, cells that are precancerous or cancerous, can actually kill themselves and involute and dissolve in the body through this process of autophagy. And interestingly, these 5-day fasts are extremely good at rebooting that system and cleaning out the damaged and dead cells in the body. At the same time, it's dropping your growth factors, things like insulin and your big growth hormone factors that are driving the cancer process as we get damaged cells, those drop. And so you go through autophagy and you reduce the level of growth factors that are driving your cells towards this abnormal proliferation, and you reboot. There's nothing more powerful for looking for an anti-aging tool than the 5-day water fast. I think if we were going to install as a single legislative move is demand that any taxpayer needs to do one 5-day water fast a year, that would completely revolutionize public health for us. And so it's going to take these tiny little moves of awareness to move us towards that. And as we get back in touch with our body and we start to realize that our body was engineered to nutrient load us and to feed us and nurture us for days and days and weeks at a time without food intake is a bit liberating. Because right now you have a drug response, a drug relationship with your food that has got you locked in a belief system that you're going to die without that 4:00 p.m. Starbucks. You've got to break out of that mode of, I need this, I need that. And our language is all around that, right? How many times have you heard at work somebody say, I'm starving because it's 10 a.m. and they haven't eaten breakfast? Well, that's literally impossible that they're starving right now. They may be hungry, but they're not starving. It takes months of no nutrient to start to get to a starvation status. And so as Americans, we need to eliminate the word starvation from our belief system, and it will free up our relationship to food.
Dr. Bush, this was a brilliant, fascinating interview, and I thank you, as does everyone else that's had the privilege to listen to it.
Thank you so much for having me here.
Wow, really, really, really powerful. Who would have known?
Right? And to think that the simple strategies that he came up with, I mean, he was so vast in his thought process, but to just sort of bring it back down to the level where we can comprehend and understand what it is, to be able to open your windows in the morning and actually affect your own microbiome, I thought that was fascinating, so easy.
You know, it's really silly though, because where people don't get it, you know, everybody at home knows that sometimes on that first spring day, when you open up those windows and open up the doors in the house, how good it makes you feel.
Right.
There's a reason why you feel like that.
That's
then.
right.
So we now just figured out what it was.
Or taking off your shoes.
Sure.
I mean, getting in the grass, pulling up some weeds affects your entire microbiome.
Wow, powerful. You know, I'm really excited about this next guest, Dr. Christopher Shade. And I know you're excited about him because he's one of your favorites, right?
Montel, I know I keep saying this, but Dr. Shade is absolutely one of my personal favorites. And it's not just for me. He is an individual who, through his own mercury poisoning, was able to transform his health. And as a PhD that has focused his entire career on toxins and heavy metal toxicity, through his research, he has been able to help so many people reduce the toxic load in their own bodies through these unique and important pathways.
Well, you know, one of the things that I'm so excited about this whole series is we're introducing information to people at home. And again, when you tell people the word, I need you to do some sort of a cleanse, I need you to do a detox, you know, there's some other people out here promoting things that aren't really real science.
Right.
And what people have to understand is that PhDs and doctors like Dr. Shade have done the research. That's the only reason why we're ready to put it on. So take a look at this.
Thank you so much for being here. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself and your name?
My name is Christopher Shade. I'm a PhD that now works in dietary supplements with a focus in detoxification. My background, I have a PhD from University of Illinois in what was had a long name. It was environmental biogeochemistry, and it was how the environment moves and cycles everything. And so you had to learn how bacteria work together with water and with minerals to sort of digest and create the biosphere that we're in. So it was really nice, very integrative type of understanding. And I was studying toxins in the environment. Specifically, I was studying mercury and how mercury moves through the environment, goes into different compartments where it builds up, like building up in fish, how we're exposed to it, like in dental amalgam. And I patented some testing while I was in grad school that had great application towards functional medicine medicine and integrative medicine for diagnosing levels of metals in us and how we're metabolizing them, how we're breaking them down and detoxifying them. And since I had the test, I had to come up with a solution. And so I started obsessing on the human detoxification system. How do we take things that get into us? Now, of course, you got to know what they do to you inside you, but how do we get rid of them? And in functional and integrative medicine, it was always sort of this black box thing, like, well, if you take this, then it comes out. And what I really wanted to do was get inside the body, inside the cells, and see what sequence of reactions has to take place to move something from the brain, the thyroid, all the way out of the body, so that we can design systems that line all that up and are able to get rid of all the different major classes of toxins.
So this patent that you created, this test, can you tell us a little bit about it? And when you test people, do most people have high levels of toxicity in their body?
So the testing that I developed in grad school and patented and then brought into clinical medicine revolved around mercury and separating different forms of mercury. It's called mercury speciation. And for a long time, mercury was a little misunderstood in how it moved through the body because there's different forms of mercury and they act almost like different metals. And so when you eat fish, you get a form called methylmercury, which is very well absorbed in the GI tract, goes into the blood, goes into the brain very easily, and it's very mobile and it has a certain nature to it. And then when it comes out through the liver, gallbladder, and GI tract, but not the kidneys and the urine. Whereas if you have dental amalgams, the mercury-based amalgams, that form, you're actually inhaling and it's going through your lungs. It has different pathways it goes into, and it's more tissue stuck. It's not as mobile, and it's hidden behind the fish-based form of mercury, methylmercury. So to really unfold the story and see where it's going in the body and how you get it out, we had to separate those two in the analysis, and that's what speciation is. And once we did that, we were able to make good sense of what the sources of mercury to a person were and what their excretion patterns are, because we could go into the blood and say, well, here's the two forms and their relative proportions, and here's how much is coming out in the urine, here's how much is in the hair, and it gave us a map of the disposition, and it would tell us something about not just what the sources are, but where blocks to detoxification might be. For instance, the kidneys. When there's damage to one aspect of the filtration, the mercury levels in the kidney become very low. Old ways of looking at mercury testing would look at low mercury in the urine and say, oh good, you don't have exposure. But the new way says low is good or bad. It's good if you have low exposure and you're excreting, but it's bad if you have high exposure and you're not excreting. And that excess builds up in the blood. And so that leads us then into the treatment. And we know that we have to focus on different aspects of detoxification in that treatment.
Dr. Shade, what got you so excited about mercury, and why in grad school would you create a patent? Like, what was it?
Yeah, I have a real linear route, you know. As you know, I was an organic biodynamic farmer before, giving that all up and going back to grad school, and then I'm looking at agricultural chemistry for my master's. And then I got to do agricultural chemistry. It's like environmental agricultural chemistry, pollution going into streams. And I'm going to do that at Illinois in this Big Ten university. And I found it really boring. And I met this guy who had these global mercury cycling models, and he needed a lab setup. And he was the smartest guy I saw there. And so I'm like, I'll do that. That's how I decided. And then I'm halfway through there and I'm analyzing mercury. You're like a monk in grad school and it's just the same thing. And you're just obsessing on figuring this thing out. And then all of a sudden I just perceived this mercury just running through me. I had 17 amalgams in my mouth and it's just all sort of dripping through your body. And, it was suddenly very clear to me that I had to get this all out of me. And so I'd gone from this holistic farming background where I wanted to save the world by feeding the world clean things, and left that. And then I started looking at the various industrial and medical toxins that we put into our body. And now the focus is not cleaning up the environment, even though that's a great focus, but mine is cleaning up our inner environment. And when you're really poisoned inside, you're wondering what that inner pain is, and you're looking for a source to pin it on, and you start pinning it on everybody around you. So there's an important part not just to our own performance and health, but there's an important thing to our society in getting rid of all of these things that twist our perceptions, twist our behaviors, our emotional reactions, our sense of empathy. These are all blocked by these toxins. So detoxification is important to us on lots of levels.
How many of us do you think are dealing with toxicity in our tissue and that's holding our weight and things like that, just in general?
So many of us.
Yeah?
This whole world that we live in here, it's going to be a, pick your toxin. Like everybody used to say to me, oh, everybody has mercury. It's like, well, no, that's not true. Everybody has a little bit, but, you eat a ton of fish and you have amalgams, you got a lot. And you don't have that, but you have something else. So we have the things that we're exposed to, and then we have the genetic overlay of how good we are at detoxifying, that innate ability to do it. And some people are up here, some people are here, some people are here. And then the overlay on that is the epigenetics. These are other things that have come in and taken our potentiality and further limited that. And some of these things we don't even see. A lot of these things are sort of mental, psychic stressors. The way that we perceive and hold stress in our environment. One of the most important things to see in detoxification is that the autonomic nervous system has to be in balance for detoxification. And in the autonomics, you have sympathetic, which is fight or flight, movement to activity, and parasympathetic, rest, digest, repair, regenerate. All of the processes of detoxification only take place within that parasympathetic autonomic tone. Because when you're in fight or flight, you're not going to use energy to clean out the house. And it does take energy. So it's a direction of energy into this fundamental process of cleanup. And ironically, the proteins that do this in the 70s, when the scientists were just finding these proteins, but they didn't really understand them, they called them house cleaning proteins. Isn't that cool?
That is cool.
So everybody's got some exposure and some ability to deal with it. And the abilities can change between classes. So I may be good at metals but bad at plastics. And so everybody's got some level of something in there. And these days, with all the stress and then even all the electrosmog, all the wireless that is going on our cell phones, these are all dysregulating to our autonomic nervous system and kind of making it all a little bit tense. And fundamentally making it difficult for you to do these jobs. So my job is to show you, well, this is what detox is built out of. These are the supplements that help it. And then broader than that, here's the mind frame that goes into it. Here's the lifestyle that goes into it. And even farther than that, then here are the diets. And here's what's going to happen in each of these diets. And so that's the message that I'm bringing.
So upregulating your parasympathetic nervous system and dealing with the fight or flight mindset that we can get into so easily, especially as type A, if we're running around and desiring to build and grow things. I mean, that's a very natural place for so many of us to be.
And that's the trap that we get caught in.
Yes.
And that's one of the reasons that type A's function, dysfunction, and they break down. And I've worked with a lot of them. A lot of them come to me and I manage their detox. And it's funny what you said, upregulating the parasympathetic, that's an oxymoron.
Yeah.
Upregulation is a type A activity. So of course, you as a type A want to upregulate your chill. You don't upregulate your chill, you balance your chill and your unchill. And so it's more about shifting into parasympathetic states, allowing space for that to happen. So there's things that we can do, meditation, breath exercises, yoga, the calm yoga, not the power yoga. Tai Chi is my favorite. That was the thing that kept me alive through grad school, was Tai Chi Chuan and Qigong. They're very good. The calming movement shifts you so quickly. You can do heart rate variability testing before and after doing Tai Chi, and there's an immediate shift. But all of the breath control exercises, just slow, deep breathing with a little pause at the end. This is the trick they don't tell you. You pause until it happens on its own, and then let it go out, pause, let it come back. Very quickly shifts you over. Then there's the nutritional side. Things like magnesium are shifting you over parasympathetic. Potassium is more parasympathetic. Supplements like GABA, cannabidiol from hemp, those are all very balancing to sympathetic, parasympathetic. And there has to be a little retraining, where we train ourselves to be stressed because we feel like we're working enough then because I'm stressing and thinking about things. So training ourselves to sit back and do nothing for a little bit. These are all important points to creating the space for that autonomic nervous system to shift back and forth as it needs to.
The greatest athletes I've heard are the ones that are able to repair and upregulate in the ways that you're speaking in a faster or more efficient fashion than the rest of us.
They can shift between those states very quickly. They're running with high parasympathetic tone and sympathetic at the same time. And sympathetic can go up and down as it needs, but they're like in this space of openness, and then they're on, they do their thing, they react, and then they can flip back. The heart rate variability, you want deep variations in speed of the heart, and the athletes have this very nicely, and they can shift between these modes very nicely. Then you were talking about like regeneration, rebuilding, and that bringing into the body, building up the body, then breaking down the body. And they're very nimble there too. When you talk about diets and things like ketogenic diets, these are breakdown diets. They're for cleaning out the whole system, creating an environment where we're going to clear out all of our stored fats. So the high carbohydrate diets shift us into an accumulating diet. Now, when the toxins are all circulating around with us and we go into the accumulating phase, we're going to pull that all into us, especially as we pad on fat. We're going to put all the fat-soluble toxins in there. And then, conversely, when we switch into a toxin or a fat-wasting scenario, we're going to release all of these toxins.
So we have all these toxins moving around in our body, and we're pushing our bodies to get into fat burning, or we're doing different types of fasting. How do we, prior to changing our diet, or even, as you mentioned, during, what are the top things that we should be thinking about?
The biggest thing is liver. How do we support liver? But people think, oh, this supplement turns up my liver enzymes and I burn things up more. But momentum and directionality to liver is something that we were missing in functional and integrative medicine. Some people know it, but what I mean by that is in the liver you have a sequence of reactions that happen to the toxins where you line them up, you take a toxin, you sort of crack a hole in it, then you stuff one of your molecules into that hole, and that makes this complex that can be recognized and moved. And so you're winding up this toxin, and then you got to move it. Where do you got to move it? From the liver into the bile ducts, down to the gallbladder, and into the small intestine, and then ideally out into the toilet. But what blocks very easily is the door between the liver and the bile tract. And so you've got this toxin ready to go, and you're about to throw it out, but that door is stuck. It's shut. What happens then is another door opens to get the toxic load out of the hepatocyte because it's starting to build up in there. So where does it go? It dumps it back into the blood to redilute it into your whole body. This is supposed to be a temporary mechanism to save the hepatocyte, but it become a very chronic thing. So then when we take things that we think are going to detox us, like lipoic acid or some broccoli sprout extract, and instead we break out in a rash here. We have lower back pain. We get brain fog. And what people tend to do is say that's a detox reaction. Actually, that was a liver backfire, and the toxins are trying to get out some other way, like through the kidney. They stress the kidney, you get lower back pain. Through the skin, a lot of people process things through the skin when they can't process through the liver, and then you'll get irritations. And most of the guys who are really good at that know that opening up the liver is the key to that. So how do we open up and keep that momentum to the liver? And what are the things that block it? One of the best things that really needs to be introduced into our common diet is bitter tastes. Everybody knows bitters. Now, cocktail culture is huge now, and people put bitters in their Old Fashioned and bitters in their Manhattan and bitters in soda, and now there's a million different bitters. But why were bitters the heal-all at the turn of the century? It wasn't just Prohibition. They become very famous during Prohibition because when you were sick, you could do a whole shot of bitters, which was like half alcohol, and that was the only way you could drink. But it was a cure-all then because people have this stagnation to the liver, and bitter tastes affect bitter receptors, which affect the vagal nerve, which stimulate the gallbladder to act. And the more we've come to understand bitter receptors, we see now that bitter receptors are internalized in us. There's bitter receptors in your pancreas, in your stomach, in your GI tract. There are bitter receptors on the ovaries. We have a whole following of very loyal women who cycle much better now that they're always on our bitters, especially when they go through their cycle. Because one of the things that blocks the liver too is estrogen. So when you have estrogen dominance, you're bound to what's called cholestasis, blocking of the liver. So bitter flavors and bitters are really big for opening that up. And just like we got so used to having sweet in everything, we have to start getting used to having bitter in everything. You know, dandelion greens, bitter tinctures all over the place. And that really helps.
It's a really interesting thing to hear about bitters and to connect us to them again. I mean, for so long, I would imagine that most people are just obsessed with sugar, right?
Yeah.
We're addicted to sugar.
Yeah.
We're living in a society filled with sugar. And you're saying,
The opposite.
incorporate these bitters and the opposite with all these different foods.
Taste is a huge thing. I mean, because you have receptors that are all along the GI tract that are measuring taste, and that's activating all kinds of different biochemical pathways. So the funnest part of my job is taking new biochemistry on old plants and taking what I know from traditional Chinese medicine, from Ayurveda, from Western esoteric traditions, and say, oh wait, this might be why that all works, and then putting together the most relevant parts of that into these, new delivery systems for old medicines.
Dr. Shade, I know that you work with some of the most world-renowned people and celebrities and individuals who have access to everyone, and yet they come to you. There's something that you do that's different. And can you just tell me a little bit about some of the misconceptions that individuals who have access to everything are still making as it relates to detoxification?
Oh yeah, I mean that's why I get these high-end people, is because they listen to people talk in the old way about detoxification, and then they listen to me describe what we now know. And so I started digging into all the literature around how the body naturally moves all these metals out. And it does this. We've been dealing with metals since the dawn of time. It's not like Mercury is a man-made creation. It was believed before I came along that there was no way to test metals in the body without doing what was called a challenge test. In a challenge test, they give you a pill or an injection of a chelator, and they see the mercury that comes out, or the cadmium, or the arsenic, or the lead, and they say, there it was all stored, hidden away. And they said, it's normally never in the blood or in the urine. But that was just a mixture of misunderstanding based on not having good analytical techniques 30 years ago. But it turns out that if you have better equipment and you can measure lower, all that's there. The mercury's always been there, the cadmium, the lead. We just needed to look closer at what it's like day to day. And day to day, there's this constant redistribution from all of your tissues into the blood, and then that blood is filtered by the liver to end up in the stool, by the kidneys to end up in the urine, and by the skin to end up in the sweat. So if we look accurately at what's in the blood, what's in the urine, we might do stool testing, sweat testing, we find all of the picture of the distribution of metals that we ever wanted to find. If the kidneys were not able to excrete the metals, and you give them the chelator, nothing comes out in the urine. So you get a false negative. But you've just stirred up all these metals and they go all over the place. So, you know, kind of like dental amalgam, it was a good tool for dentistry in 1870. In 1970, it was just a fraud. And so the challenge test was good for us at a certain point, but we have the tools now that we don't need that. The problem is doctors are very, very busy, and to get them to shift, to get them to listen long enough to something to shift over takes a long time. So there's actually, the people who are sick have more time to investigate and comparison shop everything, and they often force the doctors to do the shift. So we think about that ability to detoxify as the ability to take something from the inside and put it on the outside. But that's the macrocosm, that's our whole body. Now let's shrink down to the microcosm, which is the cell. Inside the cell's ability to deal with the toxin is based on its ability to take it from the inside and put it on the outside. And there was a great study where they find cells that could deal with tons of toxins, and they looked in them and they found it was because the glutathione processes were working so well. They had a ton of glutathione, they had a ton of this enzyme that links the metal onto the glutathione, and a ton of the transporter that pushes it out of the cell. So the cells are pushing away, pushing away, pushing away, and swimming in metal but not being affected by it. And then if they went down into the cell and turned down any one of those processes, the metal flooded in and killed the cell. So everybody used to talk about body burden. When the level gets this high, then you die. And it's when the level gets higher than your ability to resist it, that's when you have problems. So when we approach detoxification this way, at a cellular level, we're making your cells more resistant to everything that are around, while on a macrocosmic level, we're making your GI, kidney, and liver bring down the levels that are in the body. So people get better and feel better faster. So our detoxes are only a couple of months, not a couple of years.
So many of us are eating high-fat diets. How do we deal with the challenges that we may experience in our liver or our gallbladder?
The key to detoxification is keeping a high flow of bile, because the transport of bile out of the liver into the gallbladder is coincident with the transport of toxins. They happen together. So if bile doesn't move, toxins don't move. And why does bile even move? It's moving to digest fat. So the more fat you eat in your diet, the more flow of bile you're going to have. Now, you're going to want to help lubricate this process by taking a lot of bitters in the beginning. Make sure you have a lot of phosphatidylcholine, like you'll get from egg yolks or from lecithins, and that will help move all this bile. But your constant eating of high fat is always pushing the bile, turning this conveyor belt of bile and toxins and getting them into the GI tract. Now, the only thing that I would want to mention beyond that is when we're moving a lot of toxins into the GI tract, we also have to clean up the GI tract with the use of binders. The blend that I use is charcoal, clay, chitosan, and our metal binder, IMD. So you're moving toxins out of the liver to the GI tract, and then you're wrapping them up on these little particles that don't let you reabsorb them and take them out to excretion. So a high-fat diet is a great complement to detoxification.
Dr. Shade, thank you so much for sharing such fascinating information that I know so many people have never even heard before, but can truly transform our lives.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure to talk about this all the time, and it's always my pleasure to talk to you, Naomi.
Oh, thank you.
Now, you know what's crazy is I have done 2 detox cleanses. One when I was first diagnosed with MS. I did a full metals, heavy metals detox, and that was about 2001. I did another one in 2009, and I'm about to try to do it again. I'm gonna say 100% disclosure, I'm gonna look for this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chris Shade has helped so many people, and as a PhD in this specific area of research, I mean, he's brilliant. Even the work that he's done with Tony Robbins to help him reduce his heavy metal toxicity. It's an amazing story.
And again, for those at home, this is science. Science-based. This isn't something that someone's running around because they've come up with a catchy little phrase to do. We're talking about science-based data on health and wellness.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, I'm getting tired of the fact that these episodes have to come to an end. This is episode 6. We have talked about everything from, gut health to obesity to the fact that food is medicine, and we've done this for now every single episode. This has been fantastic.
Montel, I couldn't agree with you more. I think the level of brilliance, of insight, of guidance that these individuals bring to us, not only do they walk the walk, but they teach us. They teach us how to improve our health and well-being in such impactful ways.
Well, you're absolutely right, because the information these guys are giving out, it's something that we shouldn't hold to ourselves. And a lot of you at home have been enjoying the series, you've been watching, and you know that you've gotten information to this point that you've gotten nowhere else. And you have family members that you've been trying to have that conversation with that know they need to lose a little weight, they know they need to pay attention to health, but you're tired of sounding like the beating drum. Let me be the beating drum. Take a copy of this. First off, press the share button on your screen right now. But right this minute, you can buy this entire series and make it a part of your own home library. Then you can share it with others also. So make sure you get aboard. Share this with friends. Naomi, this has been great.
It's been so great, Montel.
We have 3 more to go, and you guys are going to miss out if you don't start tuning in now and call your friends. So join us tomorrow.
These people are eating more fish a day than most Americans eat in a month.
Wow.
And you're not finding toxicity issues. They assume that the women that ate the most seafood and had the highest blood mercury levels were going to have the kids with the most developmental problems. They found it was just the opposite.
When the Greenland Eskimo moves to Canada, eastern Canada, and starts eating the Canadian diet, they have the same heart disease incidence as their Canadian neighbors. They're eating a unique kind of fat that defends them against these concepts of heart disease.
And Harvard School of Public Health, when they busted the trans fatty acids in the 90s, they basically said they double risk of heart attack, they increase risk of stroke, they increase risk of cancer, they're bad for diabetics, they kill at least 30,000 Americans every year, and basically we need to get them out of our diet.